The dimly lit study of Florentine villa cast long shadows across weathered manuscripts as the master political theorist contemplated a letter from a young courtier. The year was 1513, and the writer spoke of his endless struggles to maintain favor with everyone around him, how exhausting it had become to constantly seek approval, and how powerless he felt despite his position at court. Set down his quill and smiled grimly, recognizing in this young man's plight a fundamental misunderstanding of power that had plagued humanity for centuries. This scene, though imagined, captures the essence of a problem that transcends time itself. The people-pleaser's dilemma is not merely a modern affliction born of social media and contemporary workplace dynamics, but rather a timeless human weakness that himself observed and wrote about in his seminal work, The Prince. The Florentine political philosopher understood something profound about human nature that most people still fail to grasp. The desperate need for universal approval is not just counterproductive, it is the very antithesis of true power and respect. In our modern world, the people-pleaser walks among us everywhere. They are the colleague who never says no to additional work, even when drowning in existing responsibilities. They are the friend who abandons their own plans at a moment's notice to accommodate others. They are the family member who bites their tongue during every disagreement, swallowing their authentic thoughts to maintain an artificial peace. They are the romantic partner who sacrifices their own desires, dreams, and identity on the altar of relationship harmony. Most tragically, they are often intelligent, capable, and inherently valuable individuals who have somehow convinced themselves that their worth depends entirely on other people's opinions of them. The modern people-pleaser operates under a fundamental delusion that would have immediately recognized and dismantled. This delusion whispers that if they can just be agreeable enough, helpful enough, accommodating enough, then everyone will like them, respect them, and treat them well. It promises that universal approval is not only possible but necessary for a fulfilling life. This belief system creates individuals who live in constant anxiety, perpetually walking on eggshells, exhausting themselves in the impossible pursuit of making everyone happy while slowly erasing their own identity in the process. What these modern people-pleasers fail to understand is that their strategy is not just ineffective, it actively works against their stated goals. Observe that those who seek to be loved by everyone end up being respected by no one. The prince who tries to satisfy all factions simultaneously inevitably satisfies none and loses the respect of all. This principle applies with devastating accuracy to personal relationships, professional environments, and social dynamics across every sphere of human interaction. The psychology behind people-pleasing behavior runs deeper than mere social conditioning, though cultural factors certainly play a role. At its core, people-pleasing stems from a profound insecurity about one's inherent worth. The people-pleaser has internalized the belief that they must earn love, respect, and acceptance through their actions, rather than deserving these things simply by virtue of being human. This creates a perpetual state of performance anxiety, where every interaction becomes a test of their worthiness. This constant performance is exhausting because it requires the people-pleaser to maintain multiple personas simultaneously. With their boss, they might be the eager, never-complaining employee. With their romantic partner, they might be the endlessly accommodating lover. With their friends, they might be the perpetually available support system. With their family, they might be the peacekeeper who never rocks the boat. The energy required to maintain these different masks, while suppressing their authentic self, creates a form of psychological fragmentation that leads to anxiety, depression, resentment, and a deep sense of emptiness. This analysis of power dynamics provides a stark lens through which to examine the people-pleaser's fundamental error in strategy. In The Prince, he writes about the importance of being both feared and loved, but if one must choose, it is safer to be feared than loved. This is not because cruelty is inherently superior to kindness, but because respect, which can encompass both fear and love, is more reliable than affection alone. The people-pleaser seeks only love and approval, completely abandoning the element of respect that comes from having boundaries, standards, and the willingness to say no. When someone never says no, never disagrees, never stands up for their own interests, they communicate something profound about their self-worth to everyone around them. They essentially announce that their own needs, desires, and opinions are less important than maintaining superficial harmony. Other people, consciously or unconsciously, internalize this message and begin treating the people-pleaser accordingly. The very behavior intended to earn respect actually destroys it. This dynamic creates a vicious cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to break. As the people-pleaser is taken for granted more and more, they often respond by increasing their people-pleasing behavior, believing that they simply haven't been accommodating enough yet. They might work longer hours, say yes to more requests, suppress their opinions more completely, and generally intensify the very behavior that created their problem. Meanwhile, their resentment builds like pressure in a closed system, occasionally erupting in passive-aggressive behavior or emotional outbursts that seem to come from nowhere, further damaging their relationships and confirming their fears about being unlikable. The workplace provides a particularly clear illustration of how Machiavellian principles apply to people-pleasing behavior. The employee who never says no to additional work, never pushes back on unreasonable deadlines, and never advocates for their own interests often believes they are building job security and earning recognition. In reality, they are training their colleagues and supervisors to see them as a limitless resource with no boundaries. They become the person others dump work on precisely because they know there will be no resistance. Meanwhile, the colleague who carefully manages their workload, pushes back on unreasonable requests, negotiates deadlines, and advocates for their own interests often receives more respect and better opportunities. This person is seen as someone whose time and energy have value, someone who must be convinced rather than simply ordered. The irony is that the people-pleaser, in their attempt to be indispensable, often makes themselves dispensable, while the person with boundaries makes themselves valuable. In romantic relationships, the dynamics of people-pleasing create equally destructive patterns. The partner who always accommodates, never expresses dissatisfaction, and constantly prioritizes their significant other's wants over their own, creates an imbalanced dynamic that ultimately serves neither person well. The accommodating partner loses their sense of self and builds resentment, while their significant other may lose respect for someone who seems to have no authentic desires or boundaries. Healthy relationships require a certain amount of productive friction. They need two complete individuals who can express their needs, disagree when necessary, and negotiate compromises that honor both people's authentic selves. The people-pleaser's approach eliminates this healthy friction, creating a relationship that may seem peaceful on the surface, but lacks the depth and authenticity that comes from genuine mutual respect. Understood that true leadership, whether in politics, business, or personal relationships, requires the courage to be disliked when necessary. The prince who tries to be loved by everyone ends up being effective for no one. This principle applies equally to the individual trying to navigate their personal life. The person who tries to be liked by everyone often ends up being respected by no one, including themselves. The path away from people-pleasing behavior begins with a fundamental shift in mindset that would have been familiar to. Instead of asking, "How can I make everyone happy?" the recovering people-pleaser must learn to ask, "What is the right thing to do in this situation?" Instead of, "How can I avoid conflict?" they must ask, "How can I honor both my own needs and the needs of others?" Instead of, "What will people think of me?" they must ask, "What do I think of myself?" This shift requires developing what might have called, not virtue in the modern sense, but rather the strength of character to do what is necessary regardless of immediate popularity. For the people-pleaser, this means developing the courage to disappoint people when disappointment is warranted, to say no when no is the appropriate answer, and to express their authentic opinions even when those opinions might be unpopular. The process of breaking free from people-pleasing patterns is not simply a matter of becoming more assertive or learning to say no, though these skills are certainly important. It requires a deeper transformation in how one views themselves and their place in the world. The people-pleaser must come to understand that their worth is not dependent on other people's approval, that they have inherent value that cannot be taken away by someone's disapproval, and that authentic relationships are built on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. One of the most challenging aspects of this transformation is learning to tolerate the discomfort that comes with other people's disappointment or disapproval. The people-pleaser has typically spent years or even decades organizing their life around avoiding these uncomfortable emotions. Learning to sit with the discomfort of knowing that someone is upset with them, without immediately rushing to fix it through accommodation, is perhaps the most crucial skill they can develop. This tolerance for discomfort extends beyond just dealing with negative reactions from others. The recovering people-pleaser must also learn to tolerate their own internal discomfort when they act in ways that feel foreign to their established patterns. The first time they say no to a request, the first time they express disagreement, the first time they prioritize their own needs. These moments often feel wrong and selfish, even when they are perfectly appropriate. Would have recognized this discomfort as a necessary growing pain. The prince who has always governed through appeasement faces similar internal conflict when he begins to make difficult but necessary decisions. The key is understanding that this discomfort is temporary and that it represents growth rather than moral failure. The practical application of these principles begins with small, manageable changes rather than dramatic overhauls of one's personality. The people-pleaser might start by simply pausing before automatically saying yes to requests, using phrases like, "Let me think about that and get back to you," to create space for genuine consideration. They might begin expressing mild preferences in low-stakes situations, choosing where to go for dinner or what movie to watch instead of always deferring to others. As these small changes become more comfortable, larger shifts become possible. The person might begin setting boundaries around their time, declining social invitations when they genuinely need rest or have other priorities. They might start expressing disagreement in conversations, sharing their authentic opinions even when they differ from the group consensus. They might begin advocating for their own interests in professional situations, asking for raises, promotions, or better working conditions. Each of these changes sends a signal to both the person themselves and to others that their needs, opinions, and time have value. This shift in perception creates a positive feedback loop where increased self-respect leads to increased respect from others, which reinforces the new behaviors and makes them easier to maintain. The social dynamics that emerge as someone breaks free from people-pleasing patterns can be initially challenging but ultimately liberating. Some relationships may experience turbulence as established patterns change. People who have become accustomed to the people-pleaser's unlimited availability and accommodation may express confusion, frustration, or even anger when boundaries appear. This reaction often feels like confirmation of the people-pleaser's worst fears about what happens when they stop trying to make everyone happy. However, this initial pushback is typically temporary and often reveals important information about the nature of these relationships. Healthy relationships adapt to new boundaries and actually become stronger when both parties are operating from authenticity rather than performance. Unhealthy relationships may not survive the transition, but this represents liberation from dynamics that were ultimately harmful to everyone involved. Observed that it is better to be respected than to be taken for granted, and this principle applies directly to personal relationships. The person who establishes and maintains reasonable boundaries, who expresses their authentic self, and who occasionally disappoints others in service of their own legitimate needs often finds that their relationships become deeper, more genuine, and more satisfying. The professional implications of breaking free from people-pleasing patterns can be particularly profound. In workplace environments, the shift from unlimited availability to strategic boundary setting often leads to increased respect from colleagues and supervisors. The person who carefully manages their commitments and advocates for their own interests is often seen as more professional and competent than the person who accepts everything without question. This transformation in professional dynamics often extends to career advancement opportunities. Managers and colleagues are more likely to recommend someone for promotions, challenging assignments, and leadership roles when they perceive that person as having strong boundaries and clear self-advocacy skills. The people-pleaser's approach of hopping that good work will speak for itself often results in being overlooked for opportunities that go to more assertive colleagues. The financial implications can also be significant. People who advocate for themselves typically earn more over the course of their careers through salary negotiations, requests for raises, and willingness to pursue better opportunities. The people-pleaser's tendency to accept whatever is offered and avoid asking for more can result in substantial financial losses over time. Beyond the immediate practical benefits, breaking free from people-pleasing patterns leads to profound psychological changes that affect every aspect of life. Perhaps most importantly, it leads to the development of genuine self-respect. When someone learns to honor their own needs and boundaries, they begin to see themselves as worthy of respect, not just from others but from themselves. This internal shift in self-perception has cascading effects throughout all areas of life. Decision-making becomes clearer when it is based on authentic values and desires rather than attempts to please others. Relationships become more satisfying when they are built on mutual respect and authenticity rather than one-sided accommodation. Professional life becomes more fulfilling when it involves genuine contribution rather than endless service without recognition. The person who has successfully moved beyond people-pleasing often discovers interests, passions, and aspects of their personality that had been suppressed in service of maintaining universal approval. They might discover that they enjoy activities they had previously avoided because they seemed too selfish or time-consuming. They might develop opinions and perspectives that differ significantly from their social circle, but feel more authentic to their true self. This process of self-discovery can be both exhilarating and somewhat disorienting. After years or decades of defining themselves primarily in relation to others' needs and expectations, finding their authentic self can feel like meeting a stranger. However, this stranger often turns out to be someone more interesting, capable, and valuable than the performance persona they had been maintaining. The ripple effects of this transformation extend beyond the individual to impact their relationships with family, friends, and colleagues in positive ways. When someone stops being a people-pleaser, they often inspire others to examine their own patterns of authenticity versus performance. They model what it looks like to have boundaries, to express authentic opinions, and to prioritize one's legitimate needs without being selfish or cruel. Children, in particular, benefit enormously when the adults in their lives model healthy boundary setting and self-advocacy. The parent who demonstrates that it is possible to be kind and considerate while still maintaining personal boundaries teaches children valuable lessons about self-respect and healthy relationships. The people-pleasing parent, despite their good intentions, often models patterns that their children may struggle with throughout their own lives. Insights about power dynamics remain remarkably relevant for understanding these family dynamics. The parent who tries to be their child's friend rather than their parent, who avoids setting necessary boundaries to avoid their child's temporary displeasure, often finds that they lose both respect and effectiveness in their parenting role. The parent who can tolerate their child's disappointment when necessary while maintaining love and support creates a more secure and respectful relationship. The romantic relationship implications of breaking free from people-pleasing extend far beyond simply learning to express preferences about dinner choices or movie selections. When someone develops genuine self-respect and healthy boundaries, they become capable of truly intimate relationships based on mutual authenticity rather than performance and accommodation. The people-pleaser's approach to romance often involves a fundamental misunderstanding of what creates lasting attraction and connection. They believe that being endlessly agreeable and accommodating will make them more lovable, but this approach often has the opposite effect. Partners may initially appreciate the lack of conflict, but over time, many people lose respect for and attraction to someone who seems to have no authentic desires or boundaries. When someone learns to express their genuine self in romantic relationships, including their needs, desires, opinions, and boundaries, they often discover that this authenticity creates deeper connection rather than driving their partner away. Partners who are compatible with their authentic self stay and appreciate the real person they are getting to know. Partners who are only attracted to the people-pleasing performance may leave, but this represents a positive outcome rather than a loss. The process of breaking free from people-pleasing patterns also involves developing a more sophisticated understanding of what kindness and consideration actually look like. The people-pleaser often confuses enabling with kindness, accommodation with consideration. True kindness sometimes requires disappointing people in the short term to serve their long-term interests or to maintain necessary boundaries. For example, the employee who always covers for a colleague's poor performance may believe they are being kind, but they may actually be enabling destructive patterns that ultimately harm both the colleague and the workplace. The friend who never expresses disagreement or concern about destructive behaviors may think they are being supportive, but they may be failing to provide the honest feedback that could help their friend grow and change. Understood that effective leadership sometimes requires making unpopular decisions that serve the greater good. On a personal level, this might mean setting boundaries that disappoint people in the moment but create healthier dynamics in the long term. It might mean expressing honest opinions that create temporary conflict but lead to deeper understanding and respect. The spiritual and philosophical dimensions of breaking free from people-pleasing patterns involve questions of authenticity, integrity, and personal purpose that extend far beyond simple behavior change. When someone organizes their life around other people's approval, they essentially outsource their sense of meaning and purpose to external sources. This creates a fundamentally unstable foundation for a fulfilling life because other people's opinions are constantly changing and often contradictory. The journey toward authenticity involves developing an internal compass that can guide decision-making independent of others' immediate reactions. This internal compass is built from personal values, authentic desires, and a clear sense of purpose that comes from within rather than from external validation. Developing this compass requires self-reflection, honest assessment of one's true priorities, and the courage to act on these insights even when doing so is unpopular. This process often involves grieving the loss of the fantasy that universal approval is possible or even desirable. The people-pleaser must come to terms with the reality that no matter what they do, some people will disapprove of them, dislike them, or find fault with their choices. This realization can initially feel devastating, but it ultimately becomes liberating when they discover that they can survive and thrive without universal approval. The practical tools and strategies for breaking free from people-pleasing patterns must be adapted to individual circumstances, but certain principles apply broadly. Learning to identify and express emotions honestly is crucial, as people-pleasers often suppress their authentic feelings to maintain surface-level harmony. Developing assertiveness skills helps in expressing needs and boundaries clearly and respectfully. Building tolerance for conflict and discomfort enables the person to maintain their boundaries even when others push back. Time management and priority setting become essential skills as the recovering people-pleaser learns to allocate their time and energy based on their own values and commitments, rather than simply responding to whoever makes the loudest or most recent demands. This often involves learning to distinguish between genuine emergencies and artificial urgency created by poor planning or manipulation. The recovering people-pleaser must also develop skills in conflict resolution and negotiation, as authentic relationships inevitably involve some degree of disagreement and competing interests. Rather than avoiding conflict through endless accommodation, they learn to engage in productive disagreement that can lead to mutually beneficial solutions. Perhaps most importantly, they must develop the ability to self-soothe and provide themselves with the emotional support they previously sought entirely from external sources. This might involve developing spiritual practices, building a supportive social network of people who appreciate their authentic self, or working with therapeutic professionals to address underlying patterns of insecurity and self-doubt. The long-term benefits of breaking free from people-pleasing patterns extend throughout every area of life and often exceed what people initially imagine possible. Career advancement often accelerates as the person learns to advocate for themselves and communicate their value clearly. Relationships become deeper and more satisfying as they attract people who appreciate authenticity and mutual respect. Financial security often improves as the person becomes better at negotiating and advocating for their economic interests. Physical health frequently improves as the chronic stress of maintaining multiple personas and suppressing authentic emotions decreases. Mental health benefits from increased self-respect, clearer decision-making, and the relief of no longer carrying the impossible burden of trying to make everyone happy. Spiritual well-being often flourishes as the person develops a stronger connection to their authentic self and personal values. The creative and intellectual benefits can be particularly profound. Many people-pleasers discover that they had been suppressing aspects of their intelligence, creativity, and unique perspective in their attempts to fit in and avoid conflict. When they give themselves permission to think independently and express their authentic views, they often find that they have valuable contributions to make that they had been hiding. These discoveries often lead to new career directions, creative pursuits, or intellectual interests that feel much more fulfilling than the activities they had chosen primarily to please others. The person might discover a passion for art, writing, entrepreneurship, or advocacy work that had been dormant while they focused on meeting others' expectations. The ripple effects extend to their impact on community and society more broadly. When someone stops being a people-pleaser and begins operating from authenticity and integrity, they often become a more positive force in their community. They might become more willing to speak up about important issues, to volunteer for causes they truly care about, or to take on leadership roles where they can make a genuine difference. Would have appreciated this transformation from someone who tries to please everyone into someone who contributes meaningfully to the common good. The prince who governs with integrity and clear purpose serves his people better than the one who simply tries to keep everyone happy in the moment. As we conclude this exploration of breaking free from people-pleasing patterns through Machiavellian insights, it becomes clear that this transformation is not about becoming cold, selfish, or manipulative. Rather, it is about developing the strength of character to be authentic, honest, and genuinely helpful rather than simply accommodating. It is about understanding that true kindness sometimes requires disappointing people, that real respect must be earned through integrity rather than purchased through endless accommodation, and that genuine relationships are built on mutual authenticity rather than one-sided performance. The person who successfully breaks free from people-pleasing patterns often becomes someone who is truly pleasant to be around, not because they agree with everything or accommodate every request, but because they bring their authentic self to interactions. They become someone whose opinions have weight because they are genuinely held, whose yes means something because they are also capable of saying no, and whose kindness feels real because it comes from choice rather than compulsion. This transformation requires courage, persistence, and often significant discomfort as old patterns are replaced with new ones. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when the old patterns feel easier than the new ones. However, the long-term benefits of living authentically, building genuine relationships, and developing real self-respect make the journey not just worthwhile, but essential for anyone who wants to experience the full potential of their life. In the end, insights about power, respect, and human nature provide a timeless framework for understanding why people-pleasing fails and what approaches work better. The prince who tries to be loved by everyone ends up being respected by no one, but the prince who governs with integrity and clear boundaries earns both respect and genuine affection from those who matter most. This principle applies equally to the individual seeking to build a fulfilling personal life based on authenticity rather than performance. The journey from people-pleaser to authentic individual is ultimately a journey from weakness to strength, from anxiety to confidence, from performance to presence. It is a transformation that honors both the individual's need for genuine self-expression and the community's need for honest, reliable, and principled members. In breaking free from the exhausting cycle of trying to please everyone, the individual often discovers that they can truly serve others much more effectively when they serve from a place of authenticity and strength, rather than accommodation and fear.